Napoleon from Ridley Scott. It's a biopic about the famous French military commander and leader of the French Republic. So in this movie, we follow Napoleon Bonaparte, played by Joaquin Phoenix. We watch him rise to power, kicking it off with the French Revolution, where he leads a victorious battle against British forces. So this movie jumps from period to period of Napoleon's life pretty quickly. I don't think there was a single time period that lasted longer than about 15 or 20 minutes. You'll get a feel for the tempo of the movie pretty quickly when you soar from Napoleon meeting Josephine all the way to them having problems in their marriage in seemingly no time at all. They use text on screen to clarify the time change pretty often, but that's mainly for all the big historical moments. There were times in this movie where the jumps in time occurred while focusing on his personal life and his political discussions, and these were a lot more jarring just because it wasn't too clear how much time had passed. For example, there is one moment where Napoleon is cool with the Russian commander, and then literally the next, he's talking to somebody about how he's forced to turn on them because they opened their ports to Europe. When that happened, I was like, oh, interesting. Wonder what happened there. Maybe show us the scene from the Russian commander's perspective where that decision was made. You know, show, don't tell. Leaving bits like this out made the movie feel much less like a story than it did a historical reenactment. Jumping from event to event so quickly also made it hard to get a strong grasp of what Napoleon is actually supposed to be like. This feels less about who Napoleon was and more about the things he did and the things that happened to him. So if you were hoping for an intriguing character study, this isn't it. Think like how the movie Rocket Man didn't feel so much like an Elton John biopic, so much as it felt like a greatest hits movie. So Napoleon is basically Elton John, but instead of magical absurdist music numbers, we have epic battles. And yeah, the battles were arguably the best part of the movie. They were big and gruesome, but also dazzling. These were the moments that I think will captivate most of you, if not all of you. The cinematography of the movie was also mostly really great, especially during the battle scenes where we occasionally get these big overhead views of all the chaos. There were a couple scenes where the cuts between Steadicam shots and shoulder-mounted shots didn't seem to have any continuity. But of course, I don't know if this just wasn't taken into account during editing or if they just wanted to evoke a different feeling in the viewer going from shot to shot in the same scene. The tone of this movie was very dismal. What you see in the trailer is mostly what you're getting, with the exception of a very subtle comedic undertone. There were some moments where they tried to be a little bit funny, and in my opinion, that just really clashed with the overall visual tone. It wasn't like quippy Marvel funny, it was more mature and mostly pretty subtle. The problem is, a lot of it just felt a bit too modern, and some of the pieces of dialogue just don't strike me as what would come from characters that otherwise have gravitas. It almost feels like the humor was added to make up for the fact that their depiction of Napoleon Bonaparte was otherwise just kind of boring. And that's not necessarily because of the film's darker tone, but more so because it feels like they wrote him like a two-dimensional character. So Joaquin Phoenix is an incredible actor who was all wrong for this role. I'm not saying that just because he speaks with an American accent. His voice also just doesn't sound like the voice of a strong military commander. I'm sure I'm probably getting grilled for saying this, but he really stuck out like a sore thumb in this movie. Also, while I'm talking about voices, I should also mention that for a movie about the French military, there was a pretty serious lack of French dialect in this movie. Besides Joaquin Phoenix, everyone in this movie had some sort of European accent, predominantly English, but I think I only made out one French sounding accent, and it was very subtle. I'm not saying that's a huge problem, by the way. I recognize that everyone in this movie is conveniently speaking English so that we can understand what they're saying, despite the fact that that isn't really historically accurate. But I do think it would have made it a bit more immersive if they at least stayed consistent with some sort of British dialect across the board. So overall, this movie feels like it started with the idea of exploring Napoleon's mind, but then somewhere along the lines got lost trying to check off all the boxes of Napoleon's most historically relevant happenings. I would have liked to have stuck around at particular moments of his career longer. Even if that requires dramatizing or exaggerating events and relationships, then so be it. No biopic is 100% accurate anyway. There are, in my opinion, two possible perspectives to have while watching this movie. You can either watch it with the esteem that it is a beautiful reenactment of some of Napoleon's most intense battles, or you can watch it focusing on the lead, hoping that the character we're following is more than just a vanilla, power-hungry emperor and has something unique or recognizable. For me, it was the latter, and yes, I got punished for it. This movie definitely has its audience, and I am just not a part of that audience. I was a little bit disappointed. This was definitely one where I was constantly checking the time through the second half of the movie. If you're already interested in this movie, then definitely check it out. You might be able to see the good in the movie more than you can see the bad. But if you're waiting for me to convince you to have some interest in this movie, then I'm sorry. If you weren't already stoked on this movie, then I can almost guarantee you that it's not for you. Thank you for watching this video. If it brought you any value at all, please consider giving it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my reviews of Dream Scenario and Saltburn.